Now, unionist politics and Protestantism, particularly of the evangelical kind, have always seemed to go hand in hand. But can the two masters of faith and fatherland be properly served? DUP founder and evangelical Christian Wallace Thompson believes that his fellow evangelicals should be preparing for a new Ireland. And in his words, they should consider the impact of what he described as the baggage of unionism and Orangism on their Christian outreach. Well, Wallace is with us this morning, and we're also joined by Sammy Morrison. Sammy is a chaplain in an Orange Lodge. He's an evangelical Christian, Free Presbyterian. He's also a press officer for the TUV. He's speaking to us this morning in a personal capacity. Sammy and Wallace, you're both very welcome. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Wallace, would you maybe take us through what are you proposing?
Well, Audrey, to make it clear at the outset, I'm not calling on anyone to give up their unionism or their membership of the Loyal Orders, not at all. I've never done that. But I am calling for a conversation. Evangelical Protestants will be involved in many aspects of life right across the spectrum, some political, some not political at all. But evangelical Protestantism as a set of beliefs is separate or should be separate from any political ideology. And I know that historically here in Northern Ireland that hasn't been the case, and that's the reality. And I suspect also that Sammy and I are on the same page. Both of us love the Lord and seek to serve him. Both of us are evangelical Christians. Our desire is to reach out with the good news of salvation by faith alone in Christ alone to everyone right across society. So in that sense, Sammy and I are on common ground. And I want to also say too that the Loyal Orders have been very kind to me. I have had doors open for the preaching of the gospel in Orange halls. I've had opportunity on Orange platforms like, for example, Ross Nowla a few years ago to preach the word. So I appreciate that. There are many good Christian Orange men. I've no doubt about that at all. But the Loyal Orders are bigger than the Protestant faith, and therein I think lies the problem in a changing society. How are they perceived? I've always had an affinity towards the Loyal Orders and the 12th and everything else, even as a child. Growing up, I mean, I was more excited about the 12th than I was about Christmas. And so it's part of my DNA. But I have to ask myself, how are they perceived in a changing society by Roman Catholics and indeed by others who might not just see them as Protestant organisations? They're unionist, they're British, political, all sorts of controversy surrounds them. So I'm trying to see it through the eyes of others in reaching out.
And why now, Wallace? Because this is something perhaps that others have discussed and debated for decades at this point. Yes. Why are you coming to this position now?
Yes, that's a good point. I have had conversations with fellow Christians over the years who've said to me, you should not be involved in the Loyal Orders for all the reasons that I'm kind of now wondering myself. I suppose every one of us is on a journey. Society in Northern Ireland is changing. I feel the demographics are changing. I know the Lord is sovereign and he's in complete control. But looking at it just as myself, I see change. And I wonder then, just to what extent the Loyal Orders and the association of unionism and Orangism with evangelical Protestantism is a weakness. And it's that conversation I want to have, really, more than saying that this is where I'm at. I'm certainly moving position on it. And I want to make that clear, but I haven't arrived at a definitive view.
Let me hear Sammy's response to this. Sammy, what do you think?
Good morning. As Wallace has said, there is a lot of common ground between us. We both want to see the promotion of Jesus Christ and the way of salvation to all members of our society, and we want to see people won for the Lord. But I would make the point that unionism as a political philosophy arose out of evangelicalism, as Wallace would be aware. I mean, a key aspect of unionist history and the foundation of it was the publication of the marriage bans between Presbyterianism and Anglicanism by Henry Cook. But I don't think it's just a matter of history, Wallace, and I don't think it's just something that we can look back on and see at that time, because when I look at the policies being proposed in Stormont, when I look at the proposals being brought forward by different political parties, it's purely within unionism that you find opposition to the moves that there are to suppress the gospel in Northern Ireland. For example, just this week, I had opportunity on behalf of my own party to respond to Owen Tennyson's bill. Owen Tennyson is proposing to ban conversion therapy. which potentially could ban somebody from preaching the gospel as articulated by Paul in 2 Corinthians 6. It was unionism that was against the anti-free speech zones, which today have a retired Baptist pastor standing before the courts under charges because he preached on John 3:16 outside an abortion zone. And I just look back to 2013 when my employer at the time, Jim Allister, proposed amendments to the road racing bill that made sure that the roads round the North Coast stayed open on Sundays during the Northwest 200. And all of those things are ways that evangelicals, through their involvement in politics, were able to feed into the policy-making process.
Sammy, can I ask you, though, do you believe that one can be a true evangelical and not be a unionist?
Of course they can.
So they can be an evangelical and be a nationalist, for example?
I think it would be that's a different question. It would be very difficult for an evangelical to be a member of the SDLP or Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin continues to defend the murder campaign of the IRA, for example, which targeted people specifically because they were evangelicals and Protestants. And it would be very difficult for an evangelical to be a member of the SDLP because that party has moved to a pro-abortion position. It has moved to a position where they are pro the banning of the preaching of the gospel outside hospitals, as we see with the case currently brought forward before Coleraine Court against Pastor Johnson. And there are other points that need to be made in relation to the Orange Order.
Let me bring Wallace back in then to respond to some of that.
Well, I can understand exactly what Sammy's saying. That is quite right. And it's a sad thing that the SDLP has moved to much more secular ground. I know quite a few folk who have had involvement in the SDLP, and they lament the fact that really no one now from the Catholic side in politics is prepared to stand up for traditional Christian values. But therein perhaps lies another issue for us. I have great doctrinal differences with the Roman Catholic Church, but on some of these moral issues that Sammy has outlined, there would be a lot of common ground. And again, as Ireland changes, as Northern Ireland changes, you can see realignments potentially in some of these things. I understand exactly what Sammy's saying, and I want to also commend his own party for the strong stand that they've taken on these issues. It's that sort of moral value, biblical value, where I think those of us who agree need to come together. It's just the way it's worked out, that it's largely been Protestants and evangelicals. I mean, you find within the unionist parties, those who are not evangelical will often not take a strong line on moral matters. So you're back down to evangelicals. Yes, Sammy's right, most of them are unionists, and it's an interesting angle on it, but I think it's broader than that.
My point, Wallace, is that inside the nationalist parties it would not be possible to articulate those positions because
you're right. Yes,
they have shifted to a position where they are opposed to those things.
Yeah,
but that is what you want to do, Wallace. Is in having this conversation, don't you want to make evangelical Christianity more appealing to wider faiths? I
think so, and I think again you see it's perception issues that come to the fore, as I've mentioned already. The last Orange Parade I took part in was the centenary parade from Stormont, centenary of Northern Ireland parade to Stormont, from Stormont to the city centre in May 2022. And at that moment, that parade affected me in a way that's hard to kind of explain, but we were walking down the main routes to the city centre. The band in front of me occasionally would play the Billy Boys, and inevitably the crowds would sing the words that I thought, I'm an evangelical Christian. It's my duty and responsibility to reach out in love to all of those around me. And yet I was part of a parade where not those on the parade now, but those watching the parade were speaking of being up to their necks in Fenian blood. Now I know this works both ways. And we could point out sectarianism on all sides, but I, as an evangelical, have a responsibility to deal with that on my own conscience. And I haven't walked in an Orange Parade since that occasion. So I set that out as a moment for me that was highly significant. And I know too another example where a Roman Catholic lady that I don't know personally, but she was attending a Presbyterian church and hearing the gospel preached. But then there was an orange parade to that church, as there often are to churches. She was spooked by that and didn't go back to the church. So these are sort of cameos of issues. And as I say, I set them out simply to sort of set out my own heart's position on the thing that I think we've got to reach out to everyone.
Let's talk to Sammy about that. The loyal orders in particular, Sammy. I mean, they're maybe religious on paper. Does everyone who's a member, who supports them, see it that way, listening there to Wallace's experience?
Well, the Orange Orders should be an organisation which is much more than religious on paper. Wallace will be familiar with the qualifications of an Orangeman, which require me as an Orangeman to raise my children in the fear of the Lord, to bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the truth of the gospel, to keep holy the Sabbath day. And those are all laudable things. But the thing I would say to Wallace as well is that in my position as a chaplain, he will know through his own experience with the Loyal Orders that this happens as well. I've had opportunities to present the gospel to my neighbours, which I wouldn't have had otherwise. And the largest crowds that I have ever had the opportunity or the privilege to preach to and to outline the message of the gospel have been orange crowds. I think back to our mini 12th in Dromore, where I was preaching on that parable where the man was thrown out because he hadn't got a wedding garment. And I made the point that it was like the situation that you have to be in the Orange Lodge. You have to be in good standing, properly attired, and entitled to remain. And by nature, we're not all clothed in the righteousness of Christ. By nature, we're not in good standing because we've run up a debt of sin to Almighty God. But because of the gospel and because of Christ's righteousness, we can have all of that covered. We can have that debt paid. And I was able to present that message to hundreds of people. And there have been numerous other occasions, carol services and things like that as well. And those opportunities do not arise in other organisations. And the other point I would make to Wallace is this: there is no organisation outside of churches which has accommodated more gospel meetings than Orange Halls. And I would suggest that there are more people converted as a result of hearing the gospel in Orange Halls than any other place, possibly other than churches themselves.
Sammy, thank you so much. Wallace, we've only a couple of minutes left. I do want to ask you this question because it's an interesting one. Evangelical Christians, in what you're proposing then this morning, do you think then they should be neutral on the constitutional question of the union or unity?
Yeah, I think the evangelical Protestant faith as a faith, as a set of beliefs, should be neutral. I think that is the best way forward, to detach ourselves. Now, we have, as I mentioned earlier on, I know time's running out, but we've been associated down through the centuries with unionism and with Britishness and so on, and history has led that to be the position. But I think moving forward, we've got to try to detach ourselves because society is changing and changing radically. And as Protestants, I think we should embrace that and seek to maximise the opportunity to reach out to everyone, Protestant and Catholic and others, with the gospel.
Briefly, Sammy?
I think that unionism and the establishment of Northern Ireland was a key factor in the preservation of the gospel on the island of Ireland. I think that when our forefathers said that home rule was Rome rule, the experience of the 26 counties under De Valera and all of that proved that was an accurate description of where home rule would take Ireland.
But
and it's only because of the preservation of Northern Ireland that helped preserve the gospel in Northern Ireland. It made sure that there was a part of Northern Ireland which didn't recognise the special position of the Roman Catholic Church. It made sure that there was a place in Northern Ireland which created an atmosphere which led to the W.P. Nicholson meetings of the early 20s. And I am grateful for the foundation of Northern Ireland. And I will fight for its preservation.
We will leave it there for this